Welcome everyone. Today we have the new episode and we will discuss on vertical farming. We have our world famous speaker, Professor David Smith and Dr. Tamanna. Professor David Smith, what you want to discuss about vertical farming?
Well, vertical farming is really a neat, innovative approach today to solve some of the big problems we're seeing in agriculture, and particularly the fact that land use has become such a challenge in land management in so many places in the world. Uh, Vertical farming is really an innovative approach of growing crops that involves cultivating them in vertical stacked layers. Unlike traditional horizontal farming, vertical farming often takes place in indoor structures such as warehouse, shipping containers, uh, vertical greenhouses, and even skyscrapers are used in vertical farming today. Uh, so let me just take a second and explore a couple of the concepts that are involved with vertical farming. It is a controlled environment agriculture. So, as opposed to farming out in the field where you're at the mercy of what's happening around you, vertical farming is optimizing plant growth by creating controlled environments. And these include precise control over temperature, humidity, nutriments, light, and many other things. One of the other interesting things in a lot of the vertical farming applications, but not all of them, is that they use soilless methods in many of them, including hydroponics, where plants are grown in a liquid, uh, highly enriched solutions without soil. Aquaponics, which combines fish with the hydroponics so that you have a more circular exchange there. And aeroponics, where plants receive the nutriments for growth through mist and other air exchange methods. There's some of the real neat advantages, though, of vertical farming, and that increases crop yield because it allows more crops to be produced in smaller and smaller land areas. The crop diversity, you can have a lot of crops being grown simultaneously without sharing a plot of land because of the way vertical farming and the scaffolding for vertical farming works. You They're weather resistant because they protect the plants from extreme weather conditions, from heavy rain, from drought, from heat, from freeze and cold. And it's actually a great conservation area too, because it really minimizes disruptions to native plants and animals. There's challenges though. The startup costs for vertical farms can be high compared to traditional farms, but this often goes away over time as you get enhanced yield and things from vertical farms. The energy demands, such as the supplemental lighting and things, increases energy consumption. And CO2 carbon sources are needed for plant growth. And there's some great ones that are there where you see being applied all around the world. And this concept for vertical farming really was proposed at the end of the last century. Um, and the inventor of it actually proposed a size skyscraper that one skyscraper farm could feed 50,000 people just by itself. And so that was one of the real interesting ways that scale has not been built yet was there. But the vertical farming really impacts food security in many ways, and food security, if we remember, is one of the initiative of the United Nations COPS program to put things in place, and it hits the food security through increased crop production because vertical farms typically have higher yields than traditional horizontal farms. Uh, and it helps you to meet the growing man. You can have year-round harvest, and year-round harvest. It really reduces the dependency on having to do all the land management that's necessary to allow traditional farms to work. And it also allows us to grow food in other urban areas that use use space, such as rooftops, warehouses, buildings that have been abandoned. And it reduces pressure on the traditional farms as well. And there's just so many other things, resource efficiency, shorter supply chain, climate resilience. But there's also two others I just want to wrap up this and say is that one of the other really interesting advantages of vertical farming is the controlled environments allow precise control of the nutriments within the crops, which result in, so far in at least the studies done, a healthier and more nutritious crops. And you can grow all types of food there, vegetables, herbs, fruits, and everything. The other one that really, to me, is interesting is vertical farms can become part of a community level impact, and they can be integrated into communities. And because of that, the education around vertical farming is a lot easier than you see in many places. And one of the largest vertical farms is actually in Dubai, and it's known as ECO1. And it's a fantastic way if you begin to look at it, and it consumes 95% less water than a traditional crop. So those are some of the drivers and some of the very neat things, Dr. Sharif. So uh, that's my advice.
Thank you. Thank you. Professor Rob, what you want to discuss about vertical farming?
Well, vertical farming has a number of interesting advantages. It's not traditional. I grew up on ranches and farms and owned a farm up until just a few years ago. And a lot of the difficulties in owning a farm is to kind of manage the weather. But you also have to manage soil. You have to manage insects. You have to manage the seeds and pick the right stock. Is all the variables. When you have a traditional farm, your farm or ranch, your boundaries are defined by fences, which can be penetrated by animals that can eat the crops. Fences do nothing with regard to insect containment. And a lot of the chemicals that you use to maintain the farm are harmful to people. So much so that my uncle, who was the guy that was actually running the farm, contracted a very aggressive form of cancer, and his body withdrew to a point where he looked kind of like an 8-year-old when he finally died. His body ate itself from the inside, and it was connected. That cancer was connected to pesticides. So what you use a lot of when you're doing normal farming. So normal farming can be very dangerous. The guy I used to work for at IBM, after he retired, he was driving his tractor with a piece of equipment on the back, maybe a flail mower head or a disc on the back, and he had a branch. Branch picked him up out of the tractor seat, dropped him in front of the mower, and the mower cut him up to little bitty pieces, and of course he died. Not uncommon at all, because when you're working on a farm, you're doing a lot of repetitive stuff. You can lose attention, and when you do that, and the equipment that you're working on can kill you. In fact, my cousin's dog was chewed up by a piece of farm equipment just because it ran in front of it playing around, and very traumatic for him and for the rest of us. When you go to a vertical farm, it's much more like a factory, much more contained. You can keep insects out, so you don't have to use pesticides. Your water management, which has been problematic, particularly in states like California, is much more contained. You can use very conservative water management techniques, so your water usage drops dramatically. Your environment is controlled, so your global climate change issues are mitigated. Not removed, because clearly, depending on the structure of the vertical farm, you could still be hit by an earthquake or a hurricane or a major weather event. But at least with regard to minor weather events, hail, unseasonably cold weather, unseasonably warm weather, things that can take out crops, drought, those kinds of things you can manage around with a vertical farm, where it's much more difficult to do so in a traditional farm. With regard to equipment safety, typically with a vertical farm, you're using very specialized equipment, often increasingly autonomous. or remote and heavy use of robotics. So the risk of injury in a vertical farm can be, if it's done properly, substantially less. One of the big problems, of course, with traditional farming is the farms are often far removed from people that can consume the produce. So by the time the produce reaches the consumer, it's already aged quite a bit. If you ever looked into, for instance, how orange juice, fresh squeezed orange juice was made, you would discover it is not. I mean, their definition of fresh and my definition of fresh would be vastly different. It can be weeks, if not months old, and even though it says fresh squeezed, so it was fresh when it was squeezed, but it's not by the time you get it. With a vertical farm, you can place the farm close to the consumer, so you don't have that long warehouse transfer time, shipping time to get to the consumer. So the food can be much fresher. So lack of pesticides, reduced use of fertilizers, less contamination, closer proximity, higher safety. So why aren't we all just doing vertical farms? They particularly given global climate change, and the reason is kind of twofold. One is they're somewhat expensive to set up. You need often need specialized spaces. I mean, Dave talked about being able to farm on rooftops and the rest, but you don't get enough yield by doing that. You really need more of a factory-like setting if you're going to make this work, and that means you need more of a warehouse that's been designed or at least converted for vertical farming, and that means it needs to be able to handle a relatively moist environment. It's got to have decent air movement so you don't get mold growing in odd places, and you're not introducing contaminants just by the nature of the building design. So it does require a significant rethink on typical buildings. Yes, you can convert existing structures for vertical farming, but a lot of those efforts just didn't become economically feasible because I think of the cost of maintaining a building that wasn't designed for its purpose. So you do have to build specifically for the farmer if you want the greatest benefit, and that's costly. You need to find ways to supplement sunlight. The one advantage an outdoor farm has, of course, is it's out in the air and sunlight, which is what plants need to grow and flourish, is prevalent depending on the weather. With vertical farming, you have to use artificial light for the most part, because you're going down layers, and you've got to get the light down those layers. And so, yes, you can use skylights to bring in light, but you're often going to have to distribute light throughout the structure to make sure the plants get adequate light. Oh, I should, by the way, add that your yields per square foot are far higher with vertical farming because you could manage all of these elements. But a number of your costs can be higher too. Electrical costs, for instance, which is fairly low on a traditional farm, can be fairly high on a vertical farm. In fact, you can see illegal marijuana grow farms, which are almost always, when they're built in cities, kind of a vertical farm environment. They're identified, legal farms are identified by electricity use because they use a lot of electricity. Same thing can occur with a vertical farm where you've got a high cost of electricity, but that's offset by the fact you're not using a lot of fertilizer, you're not using a lot of pest control, and your labor costs tend to be much lower with a vertical farm than a traditional farm. And so the final reason why we don't get a lot of them is farmers like to be out in the air. I mean, our traditional group of farmers like to be out in the air. Part of the reason they went into farming, I know my family went into farming, is because they'd worked in factories before and they didn't want to work in factories anymore. They wanted to work in the great outdoors and feel nature, and that's something you don't get on a vertical farm. You're in a factory, and so if you grew up as a farmer and you've got farming in your blood, the vertical farming probably doesn't appeal to you very much because that's not why you were farming. You liked being outdoors, you liked being out in nature, and with vertical farming you don't. So you need a different class of farmer in a vertical farm, one that's much more tech savvy, one that's much better trained towards manufacturing types of skills than farming kinds of skills. Though you need both, and so the end result is you've got a skills mismatch with vertical farms currently, particularly with existing farmers, that has to be overcome. But in almost all cases, vertical farming in a world where we're facing global warming and where there are concerns about introducing toxins and chemicals into the environment, into our food supply, vertical farms is one of the best solutions that we currently have to overcoming those problems. and I will pass the hat. I'm done.
Thank you, Dr. Tamanna. What you want to discuss about vertical farming?
You're muted.
Unmute.
The future of current agriculture is majorly being challenged right now. Horizontal farming is being challenged by vertical farming right now. And it is no secret that the future of agriculture is concerning and needs a change. Overall, the population is growing at about 1% per year, even faster in some countries. Feeding this growing population is a major challenge. So, I guess. Adding to the problem, current and former agricultural practices are incredibly harmful to the planet. As Rob also said, agriculture has been implicated as a driving cause of climate change, deforestation, and soil degradation. The problem is so significant that we have lost a third of our arable land over the last 40 years. So, this is an extremely dangerous situation where we might just have to see, soil degradation, and that is what is happening everywhere. And so we must find better ways of producing food for future generations. Fortunately, new farming technology such as vertical agriculture offers an excellent way to meet these challenges and produce the food needed for future generations. So, what now what is vertical farming, as both of them have discussed, professors? And vertical farming is exactly what it sounds like: farming on vertical surfaces rather than traditional horizontal agriculture. By using vertically stacked layers, farmers can produce much more food on the same amount of land or even less. So, I mean, in India, for example, we are facing suicide problems of farmer suicides. It's a major problem because farmers have to be on debt because of the need of fertilizers and seeds, and they are unable to. They are extremely poor, and there are middlemen in between. As it used to happen during the British period, way back, when India was a colony of England. And that time, the same thing used to happen. The middlemen used to uh, used to siphon off the money from the farmers. So what was happening was, this is the same thing is happening right now in India, and because of that, the whole family commits suicide. It's a very dangerous thing. So the government needs to invest itself into vertical farming in India, and also the South Asian countries, and similarly in Africa. And Often these layers are integrated into buildings such as skyscrapers, housed in warehouses or shipping containers, greenhouses like ours, or placed in spaces that would otherwise be unfit for farming. Yet, vertical farming is much more than just taking plants and hoping for the best. The practice requires artificial temperature, light, water, and humidity control. If a delicate balance is not maintained, it's possible to lose an entire crop. That's dangerous, the way a traditional farm might in the event of drought or flood. So, I guess, how does we need to understand that how does vertical farming work? Vertical farming may answer many of the agricultural challenges, such as providing us with more food on less land and doing so substantially. But how do vertical farms work exactly is the big question. And to our viewers, we would like to explain that several vertical agriculture models are available, from patio gardens built into old pallets to warehouses with stacked trays and greenhouses that produce food for entire communities. Here, for example, the Eden Greens technologies, hydroponic greenhouses work. So, our hydroponic vertical farming technology allows growers to cultivate crops in stacked plant spots within tower-like structures. These patented towers are hydroponic systems designed to produce the perfect microclimate and enable farmers to grow their crops year round. Now in India, for example, we have a seasonal structure. So every season, they're the rabi crops or the khari crops. There are different kind of crops which kind of alternate themselves. So this is something which can be done year long. And now, because of the pesticides which are being used, and wrong methods of cultivating fruits, for example, at an early gestation period is done. So that's extremely dangerous for people who are consuming them. So vertical farming can prevent that. And it so the what are the benefits of vertical farming? It utilizes less water and space. So that's extremely interesting, because in developing world, these are the spaces which are less, and we are very populated countries. Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, we are extremely populated countries, and we need more of water and space. So with vertical farming techniques, farmers can use 98% less water and 99% less land. They can produce crop yield of 240 times that of traditional farms through year-round rolling or perpetual harvest. All of our produce is powered by the sun rather than the LED lights. So these crops are not reliant on fossil fuels or other less ideal energy sources. Increased production all year round. Controlled environmental agriculture eliminates environmental impact. So, for example, indoor vertical farming often includes a practice called controlled environmental agriculture (CEA). And CEA involves a series of technologies designed around providing optimal conditions for the plants. It controls factors like temperature, lighting, and humidity to allow farmers to grow plants that would otherwise not be suitable for the climate and weather. So, food finally, vertical farms can solve the increasing problem of food deserts in heavily populated areas that lack access to fresh food such as fruits and vegetables. So, I mean, I guess Dr. Sharif would be able to speak about Bangladesh sometime, and we can discuss India and Bangladesh situation on vertical farming. So, because vertical farms can be constructed with a small footprint and can even be integrated into existing buildings and rooftops, vertical farming has already started to produce food oases where deserts once existed. So, it's going to, India has a huge desert area. So, if food is produced there, that would be amazing for our population. Rajasthan, the Thar Desert, it's a major desert, and nothing grows out there. So if vertical farming was to be used and less water and um, fertilizers are used, that would be a win-win situation for many countries who are exporting from us. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Professor David Smith, like when I attend in this Dubai and this Knowledge City and the Knowledge City conference, we find that Western world heavily integrated with this vertical farming. On the other hand, what Dr. Tamanna said that uh, South Asia, especially India and Bangladesh, they together is feeding around 1.5 billion people with the traditional approach. What do you think for this research and innovations? Western world should integrate it with this economic, like agricultural economic activities in South Asia, or how we transfer knowledge from each other. Can you unmute, please?
Sorry, I thought I had it off. I agree with you. There should be integration there, and actually integration on the major projects around the world. Because if you look at vertical farming, the vertical farming market size is about a little bit over 4.16 billion in 22, but is expected to grow from 5 billion last year to about 28 billion by 2030. So it's a fairly healthy, 27% compound annual growth rate. But North America is the largest in it with a market share of about 39%. And so you can see that there's activity all over the place as you begin to look for it. and how it can be used. The ability to work together, particularly with the developing world in vertical farming, as you saw during your visits over to Dubai and some of the others, is going to be very exciting and growing. I mean, in Asia, uh, Japan is one of the leaders as it looks at its technology advancements that does it. China has just started investing considerable money because of their urbanization challenges into vertical farming. Uh, Singapore, South Korea, Thailand, Taiwan are all making really great strides in it. In Europe, Germany, France, UK, and the Netherlands have it there. Africa has yet to fully embrace uh, vertical farming, but Africa has a way where they can learn from the ones like you're talking about in Dubai, in North America, and Asia to really help guide Africa's journey towards their own sustainable agriculture need there. But again, the challenge is, in many of these is how do you get access to the technology required for it? And particularly most vertical farming have many sensors, they have many different delivery controls, valves, mechanical engineering, computers, AI being employed. So how do you get access to the technology, make affordable technology? How do you get the skills and training in place? Because vertical farming is very different than traditional agriculture. And how do you either build suitable facilities? How do you take and retrofit facilities? And how do you integrate this vertical farming into existing systems? Because again, there's opportunities to do some leapfrog over traditional agriculture because of the reduced water consumption, the ability to increase yields, the lack of dependency on the weather and other elements out there, and uh, really the enhanced food safety. I go back to Rob's first comments about the ability to choose the seeds, to choose the plants, to be able to look at the mixes, and to be able to produce things in that controlled environment that you just simply cannot produce outside. Uh, you know, being from Texas in the United States, one of my favorite foods in the summer happens to be watermelon, and I never could get them during the winter. This whole winter, I've gotten watermelons because they're coming from enclosed vertical farms. It's been great, and you're going to see that type of thing done globally. Uh, and we lost Dr. Sharif. So, Rob, why don't I go ahead and throw it over to you?
Sure. So we kind of covered a lot of the basics with regard to vertical farms. So why aren't we just surrounded by vertical farms right now? I mean, given the underlying benefits of their resistance to climate change. Of course, I did mention part of the problem is farmers really don't care for vertical farms. You need a different mindset. But I think to a large extent it's because there just hasn't been a major push by governments to transition away from the very wasteful, inefficient, and unsafe methods of farming that were traditional to new technology that will allow us to do farming with higher yields, lower materials use, much lower water use. If you look at for instance, the states here in the United States that are having massive problems with water, pretty good chance they've got a large agricultural community, and it's that agriculture that's consuming the water. If you could bring down the agricultural water use, where I live, it's a serious problem. The cities are having to go into a fairly severe water conservation modes because of the lack of water. But the cities and towns are only using about 20-25% of the water. The agriculture is consuming the rest. Well, a certain percentage is being consumed by some of the large data centers that are out here, but for cooling. But a lot of that's recycled. So agriculture is the problem, and it's a problem kind of across the board. If we trace back cancer is caused by a lot of the things that's introduced into agriculture. So if you could eliminate those elements, you could reduce the incidence of cancer, particularly for those that work on farms. But for the rest of us that are consuming that stuff, it may not be eliminating or washing the produce effectively to get rid of the cancer-causing agents, and the pesticides in particular are pretty bad. But the water use in farms is even worse than just a waste of water. Is the runoff from the farms then goes off and pollutes our streams, our lakes, and our groundwater supplies. So they're a fairly serious problem. And if we go to ranching and livestock, we can connect cattle farming pretty much directly to the causes of global climate change in terms of methane gas use. Now, there are ways around that. One is just to change the feed that you're using, so the cows don't produce as much methane. But another is to go to manufactured and meat, and because it's much, while it may not be much healthier if you try to create the same taste, but it creates much less methane. And again, the underlying goal is to help create a planet that we can continue to live on. And on the track we're on, the planet won't be in about 75 years a great place to live. And so doing whatever we can to both mitigate the problems we're going to face by putting produce closer to people that are going to consume it, and designing farms that would better survive climate change events, and moving to technologies that would reduce farming and ranching's contribution to global warming would be pertinent. And going to vertical farms and manufactured food would seem to make a major change in our current trajectory towards climate change and the inability to live on the surface of the planet. So all in all, this is the direction we need to go. But government needs to get behind this, because it's the private industry just hasn't found vertical farming lucrative enough outside of recreational drug farming, which embraced it pretty heavily. And the end result, that means it's a place for government to step in, because you got to change the training so you get the right skill sets. You've got to provide subsidies so that folks can afford to build these things in city centers, set aside real estate so that the farms can go into place, and then think through the logistics and the rest of it to make sure that these farms can be viable once they go in, and they can be profitable once they're in production, and so they can sustain. These are things, when you're forcing a population to change the way they do things, that government needs to be aggressively engaged in. And at the very least, because the traditional farmers and ranchers, as we've seen in the past, are going to move aggressively to stop the change, you need to mitigate that problem as well. And you can certainly understand they're going to want to protect their livelihoods. A little bit of empathy goes a long way. And so providing incentives to help the existing industry pivot to the new technologies is also worthwhile, so they're not fighting it. That was the problem we had with petrochemical companies, is we the people and governments moved against petrochemical companies without mitigating the influence these petrochemical companies had on governments and people's opinions. And the end result is the counter programming surrounding global warming is significant, often significantly greater than what governments themselves put out. And so it makes it very difficult to make meaningful change. And the way to fix that is to provide incentives so that the existing industries can pivot. You're not putting them out of business. You're helping them find a new model that's better for the world. And so that it's that pivot that you want, not a forced change, because governments just simply aren't set up to fight lucrative private industry, for the two have purposes that are cross purposes. So in the end, the effort here to move to this more sustainable method of farming requires training. It requires heavy government support. It requires marketing, and we do need to embrace the full gamut of change, which includes ranching as well as farming, so we stop making the problems that are driving us to vertical farming worse before we can mitigate them. And because mitigation only takes us so far At some point, you have to actually go to the cause of the problem that's causing you to make the change, and by addressing ranching as well as farming, you can do that. So it's vertical farming is the future, whether it's the near-term future or whether it's the future that occurs once we're all living in underground safety structures. Really kind of depend on how aggressively government steps up and helps us make these changes before we have to make them and have no choice. Passing the hat.
Yeah, I mean, I generally like make comments on women, but then women are constituting every sphere of the lives, which whatever issues you might take, be it pharmaceuticals, be it farming, be it space, etc. Women are there. So here I would like to say, point out, the eco-feminist view on vertical farming. The barriers that are holding women or girls back are having real effect on planets as a whole. Now in US there's a project which is called Project Down, a non-profit organization and leading resource for information and insight about climate solution, which estimates that allowing women more equal participation in agriculture could prevent 2.06 gigatons of carbon from entering the atmosphere by 2050. That's not a typo. We really do mean gigatons. That's 2 million metric tons. So, you understand that, in India too, we have a lot of feminists who are working on this particular aspect and advising the government to scale up vertical farming. So, women, for example, make up 43% of the agricultural workforce in low income countries, yet only 10 to 20% of landowners are women. So you can see the discrepancy which is taking place here, as many countries are still legally barred from owning or controlling land, despite women producing as much as 80% of food in countries such as these. Gender specific obstacles put female farmers at a significant disadvantage before they even plow a field or sow a seed, including lack of access to land, financing, markets, agricultural training, and education, and suitable working conditions. As a result, even though they are just as capable, these female farmers produce less food on the same amount of land in contrast to men. um yeah. so the project is like, they say that they are working hard to push back against these trends at Let Us Grow. Over 50% of new hires in 2020 identified as women, which sadly is double the norm for the STEM workforce, which is the percentage of female STEM workforce in UK is as little as 25%. So this is a worldwide phenomenon. It's not just about the developing world. Developing world, obviously, women are facing that discrimination because they have to take care of household as well as the farming areas. So if vertical farming was to be included, it would result into a situation where men and women would both economically prosper. And the Kaufman Fellows report found that women-led teams generate a 35% higher return on investment than all male teams. Sorry. Much of this may have to do with diversity of perspectives, and we need solutions that work for different people groups, locations, and culture. So vertical farming, I mean, I'll suggest to Dr. Sharif to look at have a project whereby vertical farming is looked according to cultures, groups, gender, cultures, and countries. It is going to be specific, and also within the country. For example, Dubai, for example, these are desert areas. How do work vertical farming is going to help them improvise their own lands, and rather than use their own land to prosper, rather than borrowing stuff from other countries, exporting stuff from other countries. So this is what I learned. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor David Smith, about this vertical farming, like if you provide information about some companies, who is some of the best company from northern part of the world, and they want to collaborate with South Asia. Maybe it will be helpful for our audience because already we are working with the public-private partnerships, and farming definitely is very important part of the South Asia.
And Sharif, I agree with you. It is a very important part there, and under the United Nations HOP goals with the focus on some of the sustainable agriculture, that's also a place where some of those partnerships you were mentioning about can get funding to help accelerate the partnerships and help accelerate the growth there. So there's a lot of places that can help do that. One of the areas that would really help, though, and part of this is on particularly some more advanced vertical farming that's pushing the technology envelope, particularly when you begin to put genetics in with part of the vertical farming experiments, would be to put a regulatory environment in place that encourages that type of growth within the areas you're talking about. And you see it going because the drivers are so strong. I mean, the market growth drivers are there, which are really strong. To put it there, the part of the world you're in leads the world in some of the things which are necessary for vertical farming, such as LED lighting production, and particularly full spectrum LED lighting production that you really want to have for growing plants. The urbanization is just really beginning to take off more and more in the areas you're talking about, Sharif. And there is a growing desire in the area you're talking about for organic food. And the land constraints are really tremendous over there. So, some of the key advantages y'all have is some of the technology innovations. There's improved LED lighting, there's improvements in automation, there's improvements in sensors, there's improvements in precise control for dispensing and understanding the nutrients and all the other elements. The data analytics capability, particularly driven by some of the advances in AI models, particularly some of the LLMs, are beginning. Crop diversity is really something that can play well in yours. And sustainability, it focuses on renewable energy, reduced waste, and the big thing that to answer your question on how you make the partnerships work and combine there is the fact that vertical farming is growing more and more to be a closed loop system where they are beginning to take vertical farms and combine it with some of the, for example, the aquaculture and things, just where all the needs for the farm are the nutriments and everything is contained within the vertical farm in a closed loop system. If I were to put together the partnerships like you discussed, Dr. Sharif, one of the things I would focus on for the partnerships is how do you take this vertical farming concept and truly turn it into a closed loop process? Because once that is done in an economic way and at a way that can scale, I think you're going to see more of the vertical farms, because Rob is right with what he said earlier, in that even though it's a good concept, it hasn't taken off, and most traditional people in agriculture don't want to do vertical farming because they don't see this farming. They just see this growing. And I think there's a difference there. And so you've got to come up with a transformation strategy that includes education, a way to look at culture. And the partnerships and things that you were talking about, I believe, are some of the key ways to help get that, the people involved, the technology involved. And the more you can move to a closed loop process, the more successful you're going to be with applying that suite. So that's my answer to your question.
Thank you, Mr. Rob.
What's your question?
My question is that, like, how the South Asian country can collaborate more with these North Americans vertical farming corporations and do some research and innovation together with their traditional approach with this vertical farming.
Well, when you want to align yourself or ally yourself with another entity, whether it's another country, company, education facility, you have to bring something to the table. You can't show up and say with handouts, say, okay, I want to work with you, but I don't really have anything that I'm going to offer. I want to learn from you and take what you've got and adopt it into my country. The foreign facility is going to say, yeah, we're not really into that. You've got to be able to provide something as well as make something. Corporations are not philanthropic by nature, and so the end result is to create the collaboration. You've got to create some unique technique, some unique technology, provide some unique capability, and often with an emerging country, what they've got to offer is inexpensive labor, which doesn't work here. Vertical farming is something that's done locally for the local population. It's not typically done for export, because one of the things you're trying to avoid is transport costs. And so if you're doing it for export, you're kind of overcoming, or at least you're eliminating, one of the advantages of vertical farming. And there are costs associated with vertical farming that you also have to overcome. So here's a case where if you wanted to collaborate with companies doing this, first you need to create a vertical farm, and take a look at the technology that's out there and see what you could do, what you can offer, maybe other approaches to handling water delivery, maybe other approaches to handling the creation of plants. In fact, in some cases, you might have unique foods that would lend themselves to vertical farming that the West may not have, and that may be your inroad. But you can't just show up with hat in hand and say, here, help me out. You've got to say, hey, I've got something that you might be interested in, and we're willing to exchange information, share information, so we can develop collectively. The other thing is you can go to the companies that make the technology that go into vertical farms and bring them in under joint development agreements, with the idea that at some point you'll buy what they've got. China kind of does this incorrectly, though they've been successful at doing it. They bring a company in, they have the company show them what it is they've got, and then they just copy what the company has and they roll it out themselves. That's how they've got maglev trains. They got the maglev technology from Europe, and built one with that technology, and then the rest of them they built with Chinese technology. A lot of the car companies discovered the same thing. The first car company that went in was just great, and then suddenly there was a clone car company that went in that the existing car company had nothing to do with, and in effect they're competing with their own technology. So part of what you also have to do is you've got to make sure that you're not going to pirate the technology that you're bringing in. So you offer something, you share something, you make sure that the company that you're working with is fairly compensated for their help, and you're not going to steal their stuff. And the end result is you get a valid partnership that will stand the test of time. And maybe you convince the firm to open up a localized branch. A lot of the firms that build the equipment for vertical farms are multinationals as well, or want to be multinationals, and you can help them in that regard, at least with regard to entries into your own country. But the goal is to first come up with a reason why these companies and entities would want to work with you. What is it you are going to offer, so that they're going to be interested? Because if they don't see this as profitable and helpful to their bottom line, or they say they're not philanthropic organizations, they're just not going to prioritize this and make it happen. And even if you can, from a PR perspective, like we've seen with a lot of the sustainability efforts, get them initially involved, it won't last very long unless there's some kind of ongoing benefit that keeps them engaged, because they'll gravitate over to where the profit is, and if the profit isn't where you are, then the partnership won't last. I've overseen and had to fix over my career a number.
I'll have to go look and find it.
Okay, but you guys, we had a certificate, right?
I think we did.
David, you're not muted. David, buddy, there you go. So that's the way you do it. You create an environment where companies want to come in. You work with the companies. You keep them whole. You don't cheat them. and then you can build a rep as a place where people go. In fact, one of the things you might create is an area, gestation area, an area where you can experiment with various vertical farming techniques. It's highly subsidized, so you can come in and do it relatively inexpensively, and then companies can come in and maybe compete, create an award, so they can compete for who has the best technology. The award's got to be decent enough. It can simply be status oriented. It can be monetary as well, but I think status-oriented rewards probably work better here, and and allow companies to compete for the award with vertical farming technologies. But in the end, at the end of the day, you've got to create a reason, an incentive, and once you've got that, then you can approach, or in many cases, those companies will approach you because they want that incentive, and so that's the way you approach a problem like this, not hat in hand. You're walking in with something that the firm or entity finds valuable, and then you make sure that firm or company does get the value from the engagement, as well as preserve your own interests and assure that you're getting adequate value as well. It's a balancing act, but if you don't do it well, then even if you create the partnerships, they won't last.
Thank you. Dr. Tamanna, what's your closing remarks for today?
I just wanted to add to what Rob said. I mean, my personal concern is that it's. I guess we need to lessen our capitalistic spirit. I mean, that's what the profit making is all about. I guess because the need for the hour is that sustainable development goals is protecting the whole climate as a whole. The whole every country is part of the earth. I mean, it's not just something is going to affect US, and if it affects India, it's going to affect the whole earth. I mean, in India, for example, we have not said that India is the mother earth. Earth is the mother. The whole world is a mother. So I guess somewhere need to understand that capitalistic spirit was lessened because of the welfare economy system which have been brought about. So what we need right now is that that selfish spirit needs to be lessened. That we'll get profit out of this, and we're going to help them, or they'll use the technology and not give us any profit. Okay, we can do something, that's all, but the basic premises should be that we are saving the earth. It's not just one country which we are saving the entire earth. If one place is attacked by nuclear bomb, it's going to affect the whole earth. So similarly, if one particular area is not properly the crops are not properly growing there, it's going to affect the neighboring countries as well as the ones which are importing and exporting. So it's a worldwide problem. So I guess we need to be less selfish. I mean, I don't know if I'm being very generous, or I'm being very, but I guess this is selfish too.
Thank you everyone for joining today's session. I request all of our audience, please share our content as much as possible. Thank you, Professor Rob. Thank you, Dr. Tamanna, and thank you, Professor David Smith, for your continuous support. Thank you. Bye-bye and take care.